No nanny lasted with the CEO's troubled twin boys, until a quiet janitor did something no one dared. Get out. Get out of my house, and never come back. The relentless hammering of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows was the only sound that dared to answer the man's enraged shout, each drop a tiny, cold fist against the glass. Lightning flashed, a brilliant, jagged tear in the fabric of the night, and for a single, stark second it illuminated the cavernous office, revealing polished marble floors that reflected the storm like a dark, troubled sea and a desk of gleaming mahogany so large it seemed to command the very shadows in the room. He was a silhouette against the raging city, a figure of immense power, yet utterly alone. His name was Alistair Blackwood, and the silence that followed his roar was a heavy, suffocating blanket. He stared at the ornate telephone receiver in his hand, his knuckles white. The 23rd nanny had just quit. She had lasted 6 days. He slammed the phone down. The sharp crack echoed in the sterile silence of the 44th floor, a sound of brittle frustration from a man who could command global markets but could not command peace in his own home. On the corner of his immaculate desk, a small silver frame held the faces of 2 young boys, their smiles ghosts from a happier time, and beside them, the smiling face of a woman he would never see again. His chest tightened, a familiar vice of grief and failure. He had built an empire of steel and glass, a fortress of wealth, but inside its walls, his 2 sons were lost, and he, their father, was the most powerless man in the world. He was failing them. He knew it with a certainty that was more terrifying than any stock market crash. He ran a hand through his hair, his impeccable suit feeling like a costume. The storm outside was a perfect mirror for the tempest in his soul, a wild and desperate grief that had no name and no end. He was trapped. Miles away, in the quiet, echoing hallways of that very same building, Elena Rossi pushed a worn cleaning cart, its squeaking wheels a lonely complaint in the dead of night. The biting cold of the building's aggressive air conditioning seeped through her threadbare cardigan, a physical manifestation of the hollow ache that had become her constant companion. She moved with a quiet dignity, her motions fluid and practiced, her face a mask of weary composure that hid a shattered heart. In the pocket of her thin work uniform was a crumpled piece of paper, an eviction notice, its crisp edges softened from her anxious touch, its words a death sentence to the fragile stability she clung to. Beside it, tucked into a deeper pocket, was a small, worn photograph of a smiling boy with her same dark eyes, a sacred relic from a life that had vanished 1 year ago. Her son, Leo. The name itself was a raw, unspoken wound. She was a ghost haunting the polished floors of other people's success, wiping away the smudges of their prosperous lives while her own was disintegrating. Each sweep of her mop, each wipe of her cloth, was a small act of resolve, a desperate push against the tide of despair that threatened to pull her under. She did not know it yet, but her path was about to collide with the very man whose empire she was invisibly maintaining, a collision that would create a seismic shift in the foundations of both their broken worlds. She paused, her reflection a pale, fragile shimmer on the gleaming surface of a glass wall, her eyes haunted. A single tear escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek before she wiped it away with a trembling hand. She had to keep going. She had no other choice. Alistair stared at the bank of security monitors, his eyes scanning the empty, sterile corridors of his building. It was a habit, a way to feel in control of his meticulously ordered world. His head of security, Marcus, a sturdy man with kind eyes who had been with his family for decades, stood respectfully by his side. "Another one, sir?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle. Alistair just nodded, his jaw tight. "They can't handle them, Marcus. They see 2 misbehaving boys. They don't see the grief that's eating them alive. They don't see their mother's absence." His voice cracked on the last word, a sound so brittle it seemed to splinter in the heavy air. "I've tried everything. The best therapists, the most qualified caregivers. Nothing works." He gestured dismissively at a stack of impeccable resumes on his desk. "They all have degrees in child psychology and years of experience with difficult children, but they have no heart. It's just a job to them." The boys, Leo and Noah, were only 6 years old, but they carried the weight of a loss that most adults could not bear. Noah reacted with angry outbursts, tiny rebellions against a world that had stolen his mother. Leo, the quieter twin, retreated inward, into a silent world of fear, plagued by panic attacks that left him breathless and terrified. Alistair felt a surge of unbearable helplessness. He could give them anything money could buy, but he couldn't give them the one thing they needed: a mother's gentle love, a comfort he himself was incapable of providing. His own grief was a wall of ice between them. He turned back to the monitors, his gaze sweeping over the silent, empty floors. A flicker of movement caught his eye on a lower level. It was one of the cleaning crew, a woman, moving with a slow, methodical grace. For a moment, he felt a strange, fleeting connection to this unknown person, another soul awake in the lonely fortress of the night. He had no idea that this quiet, unassuming janitor held the key, not just to his son's healing, but to the resurrection of his own dead heart. He was a king in a castle of sorrow, and he was completely, utterly lost. Elena pushed her cart toward the executive suites, a forbidden territory. Her supervisor's harsh voice echoed in her mind. "You stick to floors 10 through 20, Rossi. The executive level is handled by the day crew. Don't even think about it." But the day crew had been careless, leaving a spill near the elevators, and her quiet sense of duty wouldn't let her leave it. It was a risk, a small rebellion against the rigid rules that governed her shrinking world, but she felt compelled. The air here was different, rarefied, smelling of expensive leather and a faint, masculine cologne. The silence was deeper, more profound. As she wiped the floor, her movements swift and silent, she felt a pang of something akin to resentment. The people who worked here lived in a different universe, one where a spilled coffee was a minor annoyance, not a potential cause for termination. They would never understand the desperation that clawed at her, the constant, gnawing fear of homelessness. She finished her task and was about to retreat to her designated zone when she heard it. A sound so small it was almost swallowed by the hush of the building. A soft, choked gasp, followed by a tiny, trembling whimper. Her heart froze. It was the sound of a child in distress, a sound she knew in her very bones. Every maternal instinct, long dormant and buried under a mountain of her own grief, flared to life. She forgot about the rules, about her supervisor, about the risk of being fired. All that mattered was that sound. She followed it, her worn rubber-soled shoes making no noise on the polished marble. It led her to a massive oak desk in an antechamber outside the main CEO's office. And there, huddled in the deep shadow beneath it, was a small boy. He was curled into a tight ball, his small body trembling, his breath coming in ragged, shallow pants. It was a panic attack. She knew it instantly. She had seen it before in her own son, in the terrible weeks after his diagnosis. The world had gone silent. There was only the child. Alistair's phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Sir, we have a problem. Leo is not in his room. The nanny, Miss Finch, she says he just vanished." A bolt of pure, cold fear shot through Alistair, colder than the rain lashing against his window. "What do you mean, vanished?" "Find him. Lock down the building. Check every floor." He was already on his feet, his voice a commanding bark that belied the terror clenching his heart. Marcus's voice was calm. "We're on it, sir. I'm checking the internal security feeds now." Alistair's own hands flew across his keyboard, pulling up the master security grid. He scanned the feeds, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The gym, the library, the media room, all empty. Then he saw it. The feed from the antechamber to his own office. A small, trembling shape under a desk. Leo. A wave of relief washed over him, so intense it left him weak. But it was immediately followed by confusion. Who was that with him? The janitor. The woman from before. She was kneeling on the floor. His first instinct was anger. What was she doing? Why was she near his son? Was she a threat? He was about to order Marcus to send security there immediately, to have her removed, questioned. But then he stopped. He watched. He zoomed in on the monitor, the grainy image becoming sharper. The woman wasn't touching his son. She wasn't even speaking. She was just there. A quiet, steady presence in the face of his son's terror. It was a scene of profound stillness. The woman sat down on the cold marble floor, tucking her legs beneath her, completely ignoring the potential damage to her uniform or the discomfort. She made herself small, unthreatening. She did not approach the desk, but maintained a respectful distance. Alistair watched, mesmerized, as she simply began to hum. It was a soft, gentle melody, a lullaby so tender it seemed to travel through the screen and into the sterile silence of his office. He couldn't make out the tune, but its effect was undeniable. He saw his son's trembling begin to subside, just slightly. The boy's ragged breaths began to even out. Alistair's own breath caught in his throat. Elena's heart ached with a familiar, unbearable sorrow. This small, terrified boy could have been her Leo. The thought was a sharp, physical pain. She pushed her own grief down, burying it deep. This child needed her. She knew better than to use words. Words were useless against this kind of primal fear. They were loud and clumsy. What he needed was silence, presence, and a gentle sound to anchor him back to the world. So she hummed the lullaby, the one she had sung to her own son every single night. The melody was woven into the fabric of her being, a sacred, private hymn of a mother's love. As the notes filled the space between them, she saw the boy peek out from under the desk, his eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. They were the same dark, haunted eyes she saw in the mirror every morning. A connection, unspoken and profound, passed between them. A shared understanding of loss. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her pocket. Her fingers closed around the small, smooth wooden bird. Her Leo had carved it himself in his final weeks. A simple, imperfect thing, but it was the most precious object she owned. It was a piece of her son's soul. Her heart clenched. Giving this away felt like giving away a part of herself, a part of her memory. It was an immense emotional cost. But as she looked at the terrified child before her, she knew it was the right thing to do. She held it in her palm for a moment. Its worn would warm against her skin, a silent goodbye. Then, she gently slid it across the gleaming, polished floor. It glided silently, coming to a stop just inches from the boy's hand. He stared at it. His small, trembling fingers reached out and hesitantly closed around the bird. He clutched it to his chest as if it were a lifeline. The janitor, this quiet woman whose name he didn't know, had just performed an act of such pure, selfless kindness that it shattered the cynical armor Alistair had built around his heart. He watched, stunned into silence, as his son, Leo, finally crawled out from under the desk. The boy didn't run. He just stood there, clutching the wooden bird, his eyes fixed on Elena. At that moment, the elevator doors chimed and a frantic Miss Finch rushed out, followed by two stern-faced security guards. "There you are, you naughty boy. You will be in so much trouble," she shrieked, her voice sharp and jarring. The spell was broken. Elena saw the guards, the angry nanny. Panic flared in her chest. She had broken the rules. She would be fired. Without a second thought, she stood up and vanished back into the shadows of the hallway, her cart squeaking softly as she retreated. She was gone. Alistair stared at the screen. His son was safe, but the woman who had saved him, had disappeared. A profound, undeniable thought echoed in the chambers of his reawakening heart. He had to find her. The next morning, the world felt grayer, the air heavier. Elena was summoned to her supervisor's cramped, windowless office. The man, Mr. Henderson, was a bulldog of a person with a perpetually sour expression. He didn't ask her to sit. "Rossi," he grunted, not looking up from a stack of papers. "I got a report. You were on the executive floor last night." Again, the words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. The pounding rain from the night before had ceased, leaving behind a city shrouded in a heavy fog, a perfect match for the suffocating dread that filled Elena's chest. The memory of the little boy's terrified eyes was still so vivid, a raw imprint on her mind. But so was the stark reality of her situation. "There was a spill, sir," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I was just cleaning it up." Henderson finally looked at her, his eyes small and suspicious. "That's not what the report says. The report says you were interacting with a visitor. With the son of Mr. Blackwood himself." He leaned forward, his chair groaning in protest. "You know the rules, Rossi. No fraternizing. You're here to be invisible. One more infraction, one more step out of line, and you're out. Do you understand me?" Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream, to tell him about the little boy's panic, about the simple human decency of the moment. But she knew it would be useless. To him, she was not a person. She was a liability, a set of hands paid to perform a task. Defending herself would only make it worse. "Yes, sir," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I understand." She was dismissed with a curt wave of his hand. As she walked away, the weight of the eviction notice in her pocket felt heavier than ever. Her act of kindness, a moment of pure, selfless connection, had only served to push her closer to the edge of the abyss. She was utterly alone, and the world seemed determined to punish her for having a heart. She was a dignified woman, but her resolve was beginning to feel brittle, fragile enough to shatter at the slightest touch. Upstairs, in his cavernous office, Alistair Blackwood held the small wooden bird in his hand. Its surface was worn smooth with time and touch, its simple shape fitting perfectly in his palm. It was a stark, organic contrast to the cold, hard lines of his world of chrome and glass. This small object felt more real, more substantial, than the multimillion-dollar contracts on his desk. It was a symbol of something he had long forgotten: purity, sincere, selfless kindness. He had spent the morning trying to identify the janitor. He had replayed the security footage a dozen times, watching the quiet, sacred interaction unfold. He saw the way she carried herself, with a weary grace that spoke of deep sorrow. He saw the profound gentleness in her eyes, even on the grainy monitor. He saw the hesitation before she gave the bird away, and understood, with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity, that she had given his son something precious. "Marcus," he said, his voice urgent as his security chief entered the room. "The janitor from last night. I want her name. I want to know everything about her." Marcus looked grave. "I've already tried, sir. The cleaning company, OmniClean, uses a rotating pool of temporary staff for the night shifts. Her file isn't easily accessible. They're giving me the runaround, citing privacy policies." Alistair's frustration mounted. "I own this building, Marcus. Their contract is with me. I don't care about their policies. Find her." He placed the wooden bird on his desk, right next to the picture of his sons. It looked so out of place and yet so right. It was a beacon, a focal point in the sterile silence of his life. He found himself staring at his sons' faces in the photograph. He had been so focused on providing for them, on protecting them with walls of wealth, that he had failed to see what they truly needed. It wasn't another highly paid specialist. It was a gentle hand, a soft lullaby, a wooden bird. It was the very thing that quiet, unknown woman had given so freely, without a thought for reward. An undeniable resolve began to form within him, a new and unfamiliar purpose. He would not let this woman just vanish. She had lit a candle in the suffocating darkness of his life, and he would not let it be extinguished. He had to thank her. He had to understand her. He had to find her. 2 days later, an envelope appeared under Elena's apartment door. It was crisp and white with no return address. Her heart thudded with fear, assuming it was another official notice, perhaps the final one before the marshals came. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was not a legal document, but a cashier's check for the exact amount of her overdue rent, plus 2 months in advance. Tucked with it was a small, typed note. "A gift from a friend. Please don't worry." Elena stared at it, her mind reeling. A friend? She had no friends who could afford such a gift. Her circle had shrunk along with her finances, reduced to a few former colleagues who were struggling themselves. It had to be a mistake, a clerical error, a miracle. The relief was so overwhelming it made her dizzy, but it was quickly followed by a sense of deep unease. She was a woman of quiet pride, and the idea of accepting charity from a stranger felt wrong. She spent the next day trying to trace the check, calling the bank, asking questions, but she hit a wall of corporate anonymity. The check was legitimate, but its source was untraceable, issued by a holding company that was a subsidiary of another, a labyrinth of financial privacy. The following week, 2 large boxes of groceries appeared outside her door. Fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, bread, more food than she had seen in months. The same simple note was attached. From a friend this time, the feeling of being watched, of an invisible presence in her life, was undeniable. It was not frightening, but it was deeply unsettling. Who was doing this? Why? Her life had been one of invisibility and hardship. This sudden, anonymous generosity was a disruption to the grim reality she had come to accept. She felt a flicker of hope, a dangerous, fragile thing she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Meanwhile, Alistair received the report from Marcus. It was a thin file, but its contents were devastating. Elena Rossi, former elementary school teacher, widowed, lost her only child, a son named Leo, to leukemia 1 year prior. Fired from her teaching job due to extended absences during her son's illness. Drowning in medical debt. Facing eviction. Alistair read the words, and a profound, seismic shift occurred within him. The story of her quiet suffering, her dignified struggle, resonated with his own unspoken grief. Her son was named Leo, the same name as his own son. The lullaby, the instant connection he had witnessed on the screen. It all made a terrible, heartbreaking sense. She hadn't just been comforting a random child. She had been comforting the ghost of her own. And in doing so, she had given a piece of her shattered heart to his son. The knowledge was almost too much to bear. His anonymous gifts now felt clumsy, inadequate. Money was a blunt instrument, a crude tool to fix a problem of the soul. He realized he didn't just want to help her. He wanted to know her. He needed to understand the source of her incredible strength, her selfless grace in the face of such unbearable loss. He looked at the wooden bird on his desk. It was no longer just a symbol of kindness. It was a sacred link between 2 grieving parents, 2 lost souls. His plan shifted. He could no longer remain a hidden savior, a distant benefactor. He had to meet her, to speak to her, to look into the eyes of the woman who had unknowingly started to heal his family. He memorized her cleaning schedule, which Marcus had finally managed to obtain. He knew she would be cleaning the 3rd-floor conference rooms at precisely 11:45 p.m. Tonight, their paths would cross again, not by chance, but by his deliberate design. He felt a tremor of nervousness, an emotion so foreign to him it was almost unrecognizable. The great Alistair Blackwood, the Wolf of Wall Street, was about to orchestrate a meeting with a quiet janitor, and he felt as vulnerable as a boy. The stage was set for their reconnection, a meeting that would irrevocably bind their fates together. The conference room was vast and silent, dominated by a long, polished table that reflected the city lights like a dark mirror. Elena moved around its perimeter, her actions methodical, her thoughts a world away. She was wiping down the surface when the door opened with a soft click. She turned, expecting a security guard, and her heart gave a sudden, sharp lurch. It was him, Alistair Blackwood, the CEO. He stood in the doorway, an imposing figure in an impeccable dark suit, his presence filling the room. She froze, the cleaning cloth clutched in her hand, her mind racing with the memory of her supervisor's threat. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll be finished in a moment." He looked at her, his expression unreadable, his gaze intense. "Don't be sorry," he said, his voice quieter than she expected, less commanding. "I believe I left my briefcase." He walked toward the table, but his eyes never left her face. He feigned looking for a moment before turning his full attention back to her. "We met the other night," he stated, not a question. Unofficially, Elena's face paled. This was it. She was going to be fired. "I was on the wrong floor." she said, her voice trembling slightly. It won't happen again. He took a step closer. The sterile silence of the room was thick with unspoken tension. My son, he said, his voice softening, becoming raw. He hasn't had a panic attack since that night. He sleeps with the small wooden bird you gave him. He calls it his guardian bird. Elena's breath caught. A wave of emotion, so powerful it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. Relief, sorrow, a strange and tender connection to the boy. The lullaby you were humming, Alistair continued, his eyes searching hers. What was it? The question was so unexpected, so personal, it broke through her fear. Tears she didn't know were there glistened in her eyes. It was for my son, she confessed, her voice cracking. His name was Leo, too. The confession hung in the air between them, sacred and fragile. In the quiet, dimly lit conference room, the world outside seemed to fall away. There was no CEO, no janitor. There were only two people, bound by a shared, unspeakable grief. Alistair's cold, corporate facade melted completely, revealing the haunted, weary man beneath. He gestured to one of the plush chairs at the table. Please, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sit, tell me about him, and so, she did. In the amber hue of the city lights filtering through the window, Elena spoke of her Leo. She spoke of his laughter, his love for drawing birds, his bravery in the face of an illness that had stolen him from her. She spoke of the unbearable silence he had left behind. The words tumbled out, hesitant at first, then flowing like a river of long-suppressed pain. It was a vulnerable monologue, a bearing of the soul she had kept locked away for so long. Alistair did not interrupt. He did not offer empty platitudes or clumsy words of comfort. He simply listened, his gaze unwavering, his presence a steady anchor in her storm of memories. For the first time in a year, Elena felt truly seen. She felt the profound relief of her grief being witnessed, not judged or pitted, but shared. When she finished, her voice a raw whisper, the room was silent save for the soft hum of the building. Alistair felt a connection to this woman that was deeper than any he had ever known. Her pain was his pain. He understood. Then it was his turn. He reciprocated, sharing his own tragedy. He spoke of his wife, Amelia, of her vibrant spirit, of the joy and terror of her pregnancy with the twins. He confessed his deepest fear, that his grief had made him a hollow shell of a father, emotionally unavailable to the two small boys who needed him most. He admitted his helplessness, his desperation, the crushing weight of his failure. I've been trying to build a fortress of money around them, he said, his voice thick with self-recrimination, believing that if I could provide everything, it would make up for the one thing I can't. A mother's love, a parent's comfort. He looked at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. You showed my son more genuine comfort in 5 minutes than I have in 2 years. You didn't see a CEO's son. You saw a child in pain. He paused, taking a deep breath. Elena, he said, her name a soft prayer on his lips. I don't want you to be a janitor in my building. I want you to help me with my boys. Not as an employee, not as a nanny with a list of duties, but as partner, as someone who understands. Please. The offer was staggering, unbelievable. Elena stared at him, caught between disbelief and a burgeoning, terrifying hope. She saw in his eyes not a proposition from a powerful man, but a desperate plea from a grieving father. And in that moment of raw, shared vulnerability, a bond was forged, stronger than steel, more precious than gold. Yes, she whispered, the single word sealing their fates. Yes. The transition was a whirlwind of surreal changes. Elena moved from her cramped, crumbling apartment into a beautiful, sunlit suite of rooms within the stately Blackwood mansion. She traded her worn uniform for simple, comfortable clothes. But the most profound change was not material. It was the slow, cautious blooming of life in a house that had been shrouded in grief. The boys, Leo and Noah, were wary at first. They were used to a revolving door of nannies who were either too strict or too saccharine. But Elena was different. She didn't try to replace their mother. She didn't try to force their affection. She was just present. She would sit with Noah during his angry outbursts, not scolding him, but simply waiting for the storm to pass before offering him a glass of water or a quiet story. She taught Leo how to sketch birds, sitting beside him for hours in comfortable silence, their pencils scratching softly on the paper. She filled the cavernous house not with loud, forced cheer, but with the scent of baking bread and the sound of her soft, gentle humming. She was healing them, and in doing so, she was healing herself. Her relationship with Alistair deepened in the quiet moments. Late-night cups of tea in the kitchen after the boys were asleep, shared glances of understanding over the dinner table, long walks in the mansion's sprawling gardens. They were two solitary islands, slowly, cautiously, building a bridge to one another. The world of Alistair's high-powered business, however, remained a separate entity, a glittering, cold universe that Elena had yet to enter. That was about to change. Alistair was hosting the annual Blackwood Foundation Charity Gala, the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. It was an event he usually dreaded, a performance of wealth and influence. This year, however, he insisted Elena and the boys attend, if only for a short while at the beginning. "I want people to see us as a family," he had said, his voice full of a hope that was both new and fragile. The ballroom was a glittering spectacle of chandeliers and champagne, a sea of diamonds and designer gowns. The air thrummed with the low murmur of powerful people making powerful connections. Elena felt profoundly out of place. She wore a simple, elegant dark blue dress, the most expensive thing she had ever owned, a gift from Alistair, but she felt as though she were wearing a costume. She stood near a marble column, keeping a watchful eye on Leo and Noah, who were staring, wide-eyed, at the spectacle. That's when she saw her. Ms. Agatha Finch, the 23rd nanny, was gliding through the crowd, her face a mask of smug superiority. Her eyes scanned the room and then landed on Elena. A cruel, predatory smile spread across her lips. She changed course, making a direct line for them. "Well, well, well." Miss Finch's voice was sharp, cutting through the ambient chatter like a shard of glass. Several nearby conversations faltered as people turned to look. "I simply cannot believe my eyes. Alistair must be losing his mind." She gestured dismissively at Elena. "What is a janitor doing at the most exclusive event of the year? Are you serving the canapés?" The insult was delivered with a sneer, loud enough for everyone in their vicinity to hear. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She stood, pale and trembling, pulling the boys slightly behind her as if to shield them from the woman's venom. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. "Oh, don't tell me he actually hired you," Miss Finch continued, her voice dripping with malice. "This is a new low even for him. This woman is nothing but gold-digging filth, preying on a grieving man's vulnerability. Look at her, in her cheap little dress, trying to play Cinderella. You do not belong here." Every word was a poisoned dart, and Elena could feel the curious, judgmental eyes of the city's elite upon her. She remained dignified, her chin held high, but inside she was shattering. Across the cavernous ballroom, Alistair had been shaking hands with a senator, but a sudden, chilling hush in a corner of the room drew his attention. He saw the cluster of people, the venomous posture of Agatha Finch, and at the center of it all, Elena, standing pale and alone with his sons. A cold, protective rage, purer and more potent than any anger he had ever felt in a boardroom, surged through him. A commanding calm settled over his features. He excused himself from the senator with a clipped apology and began to walk. The crowd, sensing the seismic shift in the room's atmosphere, parted for him as if he were royalty. His steps were silent, deliberate, and powerful. He reached the small, cruel circle and stopped directly behind Elena, placing a firm, protective hand on her shoulder. Her trembling subsided slightly at his touch. The silence was now absolute. Every eye was on them. "Miss Finch," Alistair's voice was quiet, yet it carried the weight of absolute authority, echoing in the suddenly still room. "You seem to be mistaken." He looked down at Elena, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second, and then back at the horrified face of the former nanny. "This woman is not a janitor," he said, his voice rising with controlled power. "This is Elena Rossi. And while you were collecting a paycheck, she was collecting the shattered pieces of my son's heart. While you saw 2 difficult children as a stepping stone in your career, she saw 2 grieving boys who needed kindness. The night you abandoned my son in a hallway, the night he was suffering a panic attack so severe he couldn't breathe, this woman, a supposed stranger, sat on a cold marble floor and hummed a lullaby until he was calm. She saved him. Her quiet dignity and selfless heart are worth more than all the money, all the power, all the empty status in this entire room combined." He let the words hang in the air, a devastating indictment. Then he turned to face Elena fully, taking her hand in his. His eyes were blazing with a raw, undeniable emotion. "And for the record," he announced to the stunned audience, "Ms. Rossi is not the new nanny. She is the boy's guardian. She is my partner." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it with a reverence that was both tender and defiant, a sacred vow made before the world. And to celebrate the new director of the Blackwood Foundation's Children's Grief Initiative, Ms. Elena Rossi, I am personally pledging a $10 million donation to launch her first project. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Miss Finch's face had gone from cruel to ashen. She was shattered, publicly and completely humiliated. The power dynamic had not just been reversed, it had been utterly annihilated. Elena stared at Alistair, her heart thudding wildly, tears of shock and overwhelming gratitude glistening in her eyes. He had not just defended her. He had elevated her. He had saved her. Later that night, the grand mansion was quiet. The opulent sounds of the gala had faded, replaced by the soft hush of a home at peace. The boys, exhausted from the excitement, were sound asleep in their beds, their faces untroubled, their dreams calm. A fire crackled in the hearth of the stately living room, casting a warm, flickering light on the polished wood floors and ornate furniture. Elena and Alistair sat on a plush sofa, a comfortable silence between them, a pot of tea steaming on the table before them. The events of the evening felt like a dream, a whirlwind of public humiliation followed by profound, public salvation. Elena was still trying to process it all. She looked at Alistair, truly looked at the man beside her. The powerful CEO, the Wolf of Wall Street, was gone. In his place was a man with kind eyes and a vulnerable heart, a man who had stood before the world and declared her his equal. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, her voice filled with a lingering awe. "All of it, the foundation, the donation. Calling me your partner." Alistair turned to her, his expression serious, his eyes full of a tender, raw emotion. "Yes, I did," he said, his voice low and sincere. "It was the truest thing I've ever said." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "Elena, there's more you need to know." And so he confessed everything. He told her about seeing her for the first time on the security monitor, a quiet angel in the lonely hours of the night. He told her about watching, frozen, as she calmed his son with her gentle lullaby and the gift of her precious wooden bird. He admitted to the anonymous rent payments, the groceries left at her door, the desperate, clumsy attempts of a man who didn't know how to express the profound gratitude and awe he felt. He confessed that he had orchestrated their chance meeting in the conference room. "I was a cynic, Elena," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "My world was transactional. Everything had a price. And then you appeared. You gave my son comfort, a piece of your own soul, with no expectation of reward. You didn't just save Leo that night. You saved me. You reawakened a part of me I thought was dead and buried with my wife. You showed me that there is still purity, still goodness, still selfless love in this world." His grip on her hand tightened. He looked directly into her eyes, his own shimmering with an undeniable love. "That's why what I said tonight wasn't just for show. I don't want you to just be the boy's guardian, Elena. And I want to be more than just your partner in a foundation." He took a deep, shaky breath. "I love you. I've fallen in love with your strength, your quiet dignity, your beautiful, resilient heart. I want to build a life with you. A real family, built on shared healing and a love that was forged in the dark. Elena Rossi, will you marry me? The question, so simple and yet so momentous, hung in the warm, flickering air. Tears streamed freely down Elena's face, not tears of sorrow, but of cathartic release. She had fallen in love with him, too, with the grieving father behind the powerful facade. The man who saw her truly saw her when she felt invisible to the world. Yes, she breathed, the word a promise, a culmination of all their shared pain and newfound hope. Yes, Alistair. Yes, he leaned in and kissed her. A kiss that was not of fiery passion, but of profound, tender connection. It was a kiss of homecoming, a silent vow to heal together, to build a future from the ashes of their pasts. The fire crackled, casting their two silhouettes as one on the wall. They were no longer broken pieces. They were whole. 1 year later, the biting cold of the city and the sterile silence of the corporate tower were distant memories, replaced by the golden glow of a late afternoon sun slanting across a magnificent garden. The air was alive with the buzz of bees and the sweet fragrance of blooming roses. Laughter, pure and unrestrained, echoed through the garden. Leo and Noah, no longer the troubled, haunted boys from the mansion, chased each other across the lush green lawn, their faces bright with joy. They were vibrant, happy, healed. Elena sat on a wrought iron bench, watching them, a serene smile on her face. She wore a simple white sundress, and her hand rested protectively on the gentle swell of her pregnant belly. The hollow ache that had once defined her existence had been replaced by a quiet, steady joy. She was home. Alistair came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her in a familiar, loving embrace. He kissed the top of her head, his chin resting there as he watched his sons play. The lines of stress and grief that had once been etched so deeply into his face were gone, replaced by a soft contentment. He was no longer the king of a lonely castle, but the heart of a loving family. "They're happy," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with a gratitude that would never fade. "You gave them back their childhood, Elena." She turned her head, her cheek resting against his. "We did it together," she whispered. "We gave each other back our lives." Their shared gaze fell upon a small object sitting on the bench beside them. A small, worn wooden bird, its surface smooth from the touch of 3 different Leos. It was a humble, sacred monument to where their journey had begun, with a simple, selfless act of kindness in the dead of night. They had found each other in the darkness, 2 shattered souls drawn together by a shared grief, and had guided each other into the light. Their love story was a testament to the quiet power of a pure heart, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can be healed by a gentle touch, a soft lullaby, and a love that asks for nothing in return. They had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale, but in the real, tangible warmth of the family they had built together. This story is a testament to a profound and simple truth. A single act of selfless kindness can send ripples of healing through the most broken of lives. It reminds us that behind the masks of power and the veils of poverty, we are all just human beings, aching for connection, for understanding, for a gentle hand in the dark. Elena's quiet compassion, offered with no thought of reward, was a light that not only guided a lost child home but reawakened the heart of a man drowning in his own sorrow. Their journey from shared grief to a shared future shows that the greatest wealth is not found in gleaming towers or polished boardrooms, but in the quiet courage of a loving heart. It is a fable of how the purest love is often forged in the fires of our deepest pain, and how healing begins the moment we dare to see the humanity in another. If this story touched your heart, know that the world is full of quiet heroes like Elena, and those in need of healing like Alistair and his sons. The power to change a life often lies not in grand gestures, but in small, sincere moments of kindness. A listening ear, a comforting presence, a simple act of generosity. Your own capacity for compassion is a force for good, capable of creating miracles you may never even witness. We invite you to keep that spirit of kindness alive. Please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear this message, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring stories of love, loss, and redemption that will warm your heart and inspire your spirit. We believe in the power of stories to heal and connect us all. We'll see you in the next one.